Hi everyone, I'm Joe. Today it's time for me to do my reading wrap-up for January 2021. January was a really good reading month in total. I read 14 books by 8 different authors in 3 genres. And without further delay, I'll get straight to talking about the books because frankly there's a lot of them. This video will probably be a fairly long one. The first book is the Andromeda Anthology, written by Fred Hoyle and John Elliott. This is actually 2 books in one originally, although considering that the second book follows on exactly where the first one leaves off, and it reads very much like one book. Frankly, I consider it as one, even though originally it may have been 2. The premise of this is quite simple in theory, and that is that there is a new radio telescope made. Not long after it starts obviously scanning the skies, it picks up a radio signal from outer space, specifically the Andromeda galaxy, and this signal that it picks up is obviously not just a random signal. It is obviously a signal created by somebody, although extraterrestrial life of some form, and essentially the novel is what would happen if this was the case. It's quite a practical novel in a sense. It's very much a case of what the people doing the scanning and controlling the telescope and such would do, and about society a little bit as well. And it's a very practical novel. It's one that I liked. I didn't love it. The writing was fairly solid. The characters were well written, although not entirely the most believable, frankly, because their reasoning and their motivation for doing things was frankly a bit strange at times, but it did what the author wanted it to do and talked about the subject of what will happen with a signal from the space, or at least a take on that, and overall I am glad that I read it. The second novel that I read happened to be another SF masterwork, and that is Greybeard, written by Brian W. Aldiss. Now this is not the first book by Aldiss I have read, and it won't be the last, because I actually quite enjoyed this one. The premise is a fairly simple one. Is for some mysterious reason nobody on Earth is able to have children anymore. Nobody knows why. Therefore the population of Earth becomes an aging population with no children, or at least very rare. Occasionally somebody will have a child, but it is very, very rare indeed. And this is a story about a community and a selection of characters who are trying to cope in this world where everybody's aging. There seems to be no hope. Obviously there is little bits of hope from time to time, and it's a very curious novel which was well written. The characters were logical and indeed interesting because they were all much older characters than you are often used to in a lot of science fiction novels. I mean, most of the characters are 70 plus. The main character is close to 50. So this is a bit unusual in that sense. And it's interesting to read about a different viewpoint of characters like this, because normally characters are usually no more than in the 40s often. So this is about characters that are a lot older than that as a whole. So it's a curious novel, interesting takes on what would happen if the population of Earth just kept aging and aging with no hope of getting a younger generation to continue. And it's an interesting idea, and I overall did enjoy this novel. The third novel that I read was The Halloween Tree by Ray Bradbury, and this is a very thin novel, but a very interesting one, and one that I really enjoyed. Now, if you've watched my channel for any length of time, you may know that I actually really enjoy Ray Bradbury as a whole. I really enjoyed this, although I have to admit this is one of the strangest Ray Bradburys I have yet read. Probably not the strangest one I ever read, because I do know that some of his short stories, for instance, which I haven't read all of yet, are very strange. And this is indeed a very odd one indeed. The concept of it is set at Halloween. There are 8 young boys. They are going out trick-or-treating, and something happens to one of them. He's taken away against his will, and the other 7, his friends, want him back. Let's say it's a very short novel. I can't say too much more. All I'm going to say is the writing and the prose is phenomenal. The imagery that Bradbury portrays in this one is remarkable. I mean, he really does go all out in this one. and considering that the length of it is very short, it creates this evocative imagery that is just remarkable, frankly, to read and to encounter. And I really did enjoy this because the characters were fantastic, strange, but that was to be expected, and the storyline was, again, relatively simple in concept, but it was actually more advanced than that if you actually read into it, which obviously you almost definitely do. And overall, I really did enjoy this, and I would greatly recommend this novel because it just worked on every level, and it's phenomenally well written, got ideas, writing, characters, everything really like you could want. The next novel that I read was Fearsome Engine, written by Iain M. Banks. I have read last year all of Iain M. Banks' culture novels, of which there are 10 in total. I did review them and such separately. This is the first novel by him that I have read that isn't a culture novel. And I'm sad to say I really disliked it really badly. Mainly because I have no idea, even now, even though I've read the book, what is actually going on in this novel. I can't describe the plot to you because I didn't understand it. It felt very much like one of the short stories from one of the culture novels, State of the Art, because that short story collection felt very much experimental. This felt like an experimental novel, and this was an experiment that for me went wrong. It wasn't a successful experiment. Now, the writing was Banks' usual ideas, almost, but there are some strange takes that he does in this novel. One of them is some of the paragraphs are from the point of view of this one particular character, and they are written like his thoughts. And he's not the most well-educated person, so the words are written how he thinks about them, rather than how they're actually spelled in English. And it looks like really bad grammar and bad spelling and such. And it's quite hard to take, frankly. I'm not used to that in books. I mean, parts of it felt almost like textbook and such. This didn't work for me, and I mean, I was hoping it might, but I'm not surprised in some ways. I mean, you know, all the culture novels worked for me, so the fact that something by him has finally not worked out for me is to be expected, frankly. I mean, there's very few authors that actually have a perfect record with me. Banks is not one of them, although he's doing extremely well overall. And if you've read this and understand it and want to talk about it with me, then feel free, because you might be able to actually explain what went on in it, because I don't know. Anyway, with that said, that is it for this novel. Now, the next book I read is actually somewhat similar to the Andromeda Anthology, because it is His Master's Voice, written by Stanislaw Lem. This is a novel where the premise is actually similar to that one, in that it is a radio telescope picks up a signal from the stars and what would happen on Earth with this knowledge. However, whereas the Andromeda Anthology is very much a practical one, with the engineers and technicians and the scientists behind the telescope, a story about them and what they would do, and their sort of adventures, I suppose you could call it. This is a sort of grander novel in terms of this explores the larger scope of what it means for humanity, what it means for society as a whole, for technology, for the way we think about ourselves and about the universe. I didn't 100% understand all the parts of it, because it's written with a writing style that is slightly strange in parts, but I know that with a reread in the future this will become more apparent and more obvious to me. That kind of novel, I think it works with rereads much better. The first time I read it, which is now, it worked okay, not brilliantly, but over time it will improve, and I will one day truly understand this novel, and I will probably do a review then. I can't do one now because frankly the points I missed quite a lot of them, but overall I would recommend it, and it's a brilliant translated science fiction novel, and I really did enjoy this as a whole. The next novel that I read was Native Tongue, written by Suzette Haden-Elgin. Now, as far as the story is concerned, I didn't enjoy this novel particularly. It's very dark and grim and brutal. However, I enjoyed the reading experience of this novel because this was a buddy read with a friend of mine and fellow booktuber, Rachel, known as Canadian Booktube. Frankly, the reason that this novel worked for me was because I read it and discussed it with Rachel. We would read sections of it day by day. We would be sending our thoughts back and forth to each other, and frankly this novel worked purely because of that. If I had read this without talking to Rachel about it, this book would have just been unpleasant and dark and grim, and frankly I would be very negative about it. Now, I'm still not exactly happy by what went on in the novel, because this is a totalitarian future where there is an extreme patriarchy that has overtaken the earth. Literally, women have had all rights taken away from them, absolutely all of them. They can't do anything by themselves. They're literally told by men what to do every moment of their lives, basically. Or at least the men like to think so. Men in the novel are generally very stupid, very unpleasant, and there are basically no redeeming male characters in this novel, which surprised me because you would think there might be one or two, but this is a fairly extreme novel and a fairly extreme take on the idea of concepts of feminism and concepts of patriarchy and how far it can go under the unfortunate circumstances. I am glad that I read this novel, especially with Rachel. Despite the fact I didn't enjoy the concepts of it and the ideas that this discusses and makes you think about, frankly, it is worth reading. I mean, you may not enjoy reading the novel. I can't say I did enjoy it, but it's worth reading. And sometimes books are worth reading even though you might not entirely enjoy them. This is one of those strange times. It doesn't happen often, but it does happen, and I'm just really happy that I read this overall because of Rachel. The next novel that I read was Ambiguity Machines and Other Stories, written by Vandana Singh. This is a science fiction short story collection. This is one of my favourite individual novels of the entire month. This is a sort of fairly medium length science fiction short story collection, and every single short story in it was brilliant. They didn't always work out for me. Some of the ideas in some of them I thought was a bit strange, but I still enjoyed the reading experience of every short story, and overall this was a phenomenal collection. Some of my favourite short stories were, and actually it was the last one which strangely enough Rachel mentioned to me, and that was Requiem, the last story. I'm not going to talk about what it was about at all because for short stories I'm paranoid of spoilers, but Requiem was a very interesting and quite powerful short story. All the short stories in this have got very powerful and strong ideas, and it's a very well written book. The prose is phenomenal. The ideas are a little bit, I suppose you could say, alternative for science fiction short stories. Some of them seem more spiritual and almost, are entirely spiritual, and some of them have an almost fantasy feel rather than science fiction, although they are ultimately science fiction. So that was a strange experience, but it really did work out for me, and I would very highly recommend this collection, which did indeed win awards as well. The penultimate book is actually not just a book, but is actually a set, and that is the Immortal Quartet, written by Tamora Pierce. This is actually 4 books, namely being Wild Magic, Wolf Speaker, Emperor Mage, and finally The Realms of the Gods. This is a fantasy quartet. It's a really fun one. It's well written. It's I think this would be classed as a young adult fantasy, which for me, if you didn't know, young adult has almost never worked for me, with one or two rare exceptions. This works extremely well. It's just a really fun fantasy story based around the main character being a young girl called Dane. She finds out that she has this native magic, or wild magic as the first title might give you a clue, and she can basically understand and communicate with animals, which other people, certain other magic users can do, but not quite like her. She's got this natural ability to do it, and let's just say it's a big series of adventures that she goes on, where she's growing up as a person, and maturing and becoming more than she was originally. And this is just a brilliant, fun collection about a young character growing up, becoming more than they were. And overall, I really would recommend this because frankly it was amazing overall, and I greatly enjoyed it enormously. This was one of the most fun fantasy collections I've read in a long time. And finally, the last set of books that I'm going to speak about are by Terry Pratchett, and those are The Colour of Magic. This is one of the Discord Library Collector's Editions. Then we have The Light Fantastic, and then to accompany this we have The Light Fantastic graphic novel. Now, as you may know if you watched my videos fairly recently, I'm doing a project this year where I am reading every single book week by week, starting from 2 weeks ago, or nearly 3 weeks ago now, and working through almost every novel with a few exceptions. And I'm starting with the Discord novels. These are the first two with the graphic novel, and I've almost forgot why I've enjoyed Terry Pratchett and why I always consider Terry Pratchett one of the favourite novelists I've ever had. There's nobody quite like Pratchett. His writing is fantastic. The humour is subtle and understated, but all the times it's blatant in your face, which frankly describes my own sense of humour perfectly, because I first read these two novels when I was 8 years old. That was actually the first novel I ever read as a child, these two were, and these literally helped me on a very fundamental level, my developmental level. This had an influence on. So these were very important and critical novels for me as a child, and as a result these will always be very significant to me on an incredibly important and incredibly personal level. They are just fun, brilliantly well written, amazing characters, and the thing that always gets me nowadays is, by comparison to what I've read in more recent years, these now, by comparison, are remarkably short novels. They are barely over 200 pages each, which by some fantasy novel standards are brilliant. Yet the amount that Pratchett manages to pack into those 200 pages is frankly phenomenal. Everything he writes is just with a sense of humour and a sense of fun, and he's just taking off little ideas from the real world and just twisting them, not around completely. You'll take a concept from that we take for granted, and then you'll just twist it slightly, at a slightly strange angle, and then you're always a case of, is this concept that I'm thinking of, or is it something else? Because you often take concepts and twist them in such a strange way that you're never entirely sure which concept he's actually making fun of or being sarcastic about, and it's just enjoyable to see. And as you can tell, I mean, I just love Terry Pratchett. I love the Discord novels, and I mean, obviously I'm going to recommend you read Terry Pratchett because it's Terry Pratchett. What else can I say? I'm doing a group read for all of these over the course of the year, which I have a Discord server for where I'm going to talk about them. So if you want to join that Discord server and talk about them as I'm reading them, I'm reading one Discord book for now every Monday. Obviously that might change. Then I'll put the link in the description box below. And indeed, the description for all of these novels, I'm not going to try and hold all of them up because I'll probably drop them all over the floor, can be found in the description box below, as they always are. If you have anything to say about any of the novels, if you've read them and why you enjoyed them, then please leave a comment. If you've got any suggestions for me for what you might think I might enjoy based on any of these, then again leave a comment. I mean, that said, that is it for this video, so thank you for watching and I'll see you another day. Bye for now.